Senator Odenvar. There's a lot of interest in this subject matter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your testimony. So you said that the Canadian government has asked the government in Myanmar to exercise restraint. Are they listening? Have you seen any proof that they're listening?
Well, I think only time will tell, but I would like to stress that these communications have been made numerous times at the highest levels by the Prime Minister and by the Foreign Minister. The most recent communication was actually this Saturday, where a Minister of Foreign Affairs had a telephone conversation with the Senior General, Min Aung Hlaing, where they had an opportunity to discuss next steps in the situation. Our Minister raised and discussed in some detail the Kofi Annan report and more importantly, next steps in its implementation. And she again reiterated to the Senior General the need for accountability for human rights violations and the need for refugees to be able to receive, on a timely basis, humanitarian assistance.
The Kofi Annan report, wasn't it rejected by the government officials? Didn't Gov't, the spokesperson for the President's office, on the 10th of July said that the Annan Commission was a good shield for the government? It was indeed a good shield for the government, that's a quote. It was time to buy time to finish up the complete wiping out of the Rohingya. That's what we're hearing. Isn't it true that they didn't really want to implement anything and it was rejected by them?
I think it's very important not to generalize too much. Various people in the government, including the Senior General and Aung San Suu Kyi, have endorsed the report and are looking at follow-up program. So I'm basically unable to comment on other individual comments made on that.
So when did Aung Suu Kyi visited Canada in early spring, or was it early summer, Gov't, who happens to be her political spokesperson on this Rohingya issue, and I know because during dinner I asked who I should be addressing, my questions about the Rohingya to, and he was the person I was pointed out to. So I feel, he's a good person to respond to this. Why the hesitancy? Like the Foreign Affairs Minister says, looks like ethnic cleansing. And I asked because a lot of people have raised this question to me. I was at a rally yesterday and they said, why are we calling it looks like? Why aren't we calling a spade a spade?
Well, I think she has used the term ethnic cleansing quite directly in other contexts and other communications, so I don't think there's any debate about looks like.
Since the rally that she addressed in Toronto, where she said she has used it as ethnic cleansing?
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Senator No.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Bobiash. In your presentations, I've noticed that one paragraph is very troubling to me. Here you say that the timing of ARSA attacks was not accidental after the government of Myanmar endorsed the Commission recommendations. Can you describe us how the current events are different from the human rights abuses the Rohingya have endured before the final report recommendations were presented and before the 25th August attack?
Thank you very much for the question. Mr. Chairman, the evidence shows that the group following the presentation of the report was extremely well organized in attacking police stations and other authorities the day following the presentation of the report. And subsequently the military exercised their own decision to enforce the security in Rakhine State. And this is of great concern to Canada and other countries in terms of the use of force and the amount of force following those attacks. And this is the issue that we are continuing to follow up on and ensure that the human rights abuses and the violence comes to an immediate end, and that those who have been affected by this violence are receiving appropriate humanitarian assistance and are allowed to return to their homes in Rakhine State.
Thank you for your answer. The previous witness, Mr. Smith, say that the attack was made with sticks, baton, knife, something like that. And how can this one, do you think, is create heavy casualties to the 30th post and then the military post command with sticks and knife and so on?
Well, exactly. That is the degree of response by the military is of great concern to Canada. And as our Minister and Prime Minister have indicated both to Aung San Suu Kyi and most recently over the weekend in the conversation with the military commander, the Minister raised concerns about human rights abuses and the use of force, and that the perpetrators of this violence be brought to justice. And that's exactly what she raised in her conversation with the military commander, and as well as our Prime Minister had raised it with Aung San Suu Kyi, that fact-finding mission be allowed to go to Rakhine State and find out exactly what happened and to understand better the human rights abuses and the overuse of violence against the Rohingya people.
At what point in the conflict we think that will Canada start imposing targeted sanctions on the senior military command and the military-owned enterprises who are perpetrating these atrocities?
Go.
Mr. Chairman, the sanctions related to Myanmar continue to this day. Actually, on December 13, 2007, the special economic measures, Burma regulations, came into force, and they are still in force. And these measures, including a freeze on assets in Canada of any designated Myanmar nationals connected with the Myanmar state, as well as an arms embargo, including the prohibition on the exporting and importing of arms related to materials to and from Myanmar. And we have very stringent export controls, and those are in place, and those regulations and sanctions have not changed since well before the attacks on August the 25th.
Thank you, Senator Noble. We'll put you on the
Second round?
Yes. We have.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Senator McFedrin, Senator Obenbar.
Thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to pick up on Senator No's comment to you, question to you. Can you confirm for us that there are no arms going from Canada to Myanmar?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you confirm for us that there is no money flowing from Canada to any of the corporations that are connected to the Myanmar Army, in particular the Myanmar Economic Corporation and the Myanmar Economic Holding Limited?
Yes, I can confirm that. There is a very specific, if you look at the sanctions, we can provide you with the list of sanctioned companies and institutions, if you wish.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Obenbar.
We're all on the same line. Can you confirm to us that Canada is not either, well, unintentionally possibly, funding police training in Myanmar, which could be, used in ways that we would not imagine through the Association of South Asian Nations, through our funding to the Association of South Asian Nations?
Yes, we can confirm that.
You can confirm that.
Yes.
Senator Pate.
Continuing on in this line, what are your recommendations to the Minister and to the Canadian government in terms of priority of actions to be taken now to interrupt what is happening to the Rohingya?
Our most immediate priority is to ensure that the victims of this conflict are able to receive humanitarian assistance, which is urgently needed on both sides of the border, both in Bangladesh and in Myanmar. And we need to have a continued dialogue and put pressure on the leadership in the country that they must act responsibly. And our minister will continue to work very closely with our allied governments, with the international community, with the multilateral system, to make sure that the above happen.
Is one of your recommendations in keeping with some recommendations that have been made to revoke the leader's honorary citizenship?
I don't want to speculate on revocation of her citizenship, but in conversations with Aung San Suu Kyi, both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have been very direct in terms of personal accountability and leadership on this issue.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll go to a second round. Senator Toulajan, Senator No, Senator McFedrin. We have about 10 minutes.
So I'm just looking at, when Aung Suu Kyi visited in June, early June, the Prime Minister announced 8.8 million in support for humanitarian assistance and advancement of peace and stability. And these contributions would help protect human rights and promote women's participation in national peace process. Has that money been given to them? I mean, our Prime Minister was very, very clear. He spoke about, that we encourage an inclusive, and here I'm quoting, peace process that respects human rights and meets the needs of all people in Myanmar, especially those of traditionally vulnerable populations, including ethnic and religious minorities, women and children. So considering what has been happening there since then, has anything changed? Since 2013, Canada has sort of contributed almost $95 million to the government in development assistance. Do you think it's time for us to put a stop to, giving them money until they start respecting the lives of all their citizens?
I will ask our expert on international humanitarian assistance, Mr. Salewicz, to give a more detailed reply. But just to preface his remarks, I want to make it clear that the Government of Canada does not provide development assistance directly to the Government of Myanmar, that we work almost exclusively through international agencies and NGOs. Secondly, the development context here is very important. Myanmar is one of the poorest countries of the world, and Rakhine State is in one of the poorest regions of this poorest country. Because of that, the assistance provided through the multilateral system is probably much more important than it would be in most developing countries, and that's why a lot of our assistance, especially the emergency assistance, is provided through the UN system. And I'll ask Mr. Salewicz to give a little more background on that.
Sure. Thank you. So I'll speak to the humanitarian assistance part of your question. As Mr. Bobiash mentioned, we work with experienced partners, Red Cross, international NGOs, the UN, that are active on the ground. Our funds do not go through the government of Myanmar. That assistance is provided based on the needs, and we focus very much on the most vulnerable populations in the country. Much of our assistance over the last few years, arising from the violence in 2012, has been directed to the Rakhine State and to partners working in that context. That includes organizations such as the World Food Program, International Committee of the Red Cross, UNICEF, and a number of NGOs as well. They are responding to the very basic needs of the population there, whether it's shelter, food, water and sanitation. The challenges, of course, right now in northern Rakhine is access, and we're very concerned about the challenges faced by our organizations, and as Mr. Bobiash has mentioned, have been very vocal about seeking access for our partners to work there. Our assistance is also, of course, focused on the results of the movement of the population into Bangladesh. We had programming already in place before the current movement of the population, responding to previous violence and previous movements of population into Bangladesh. So in that fashion, we were actually able to provide funding right away. Our assistance was already on the ground and responding in Bangladesh when the current round of violence happened. Subsequent to that, we have made additional allocations to Bangladesh as well as to work in Rakhine, recognizing, of course, that northern Rakhine is very difficult, as we've heard from other witnesses, for partners to work. So the very limited